Hello everyone, welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. I want to give a quick update about the online interactive live show coming up in February. Right now it is scheduled for Sunday, February 12th, 2023 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I do have a special guest joining me for my first live show. This will be a themed show and we will have an after party. During the show, all of you can use the chat to react, ask questions, talk to us throughout the show, and chat amongst yourselves. The after party will be extremely chill and easygoing. We can talk about the episode, answer questions, have some laughs, drinks, food, and just hang out with each other for however long y'all would like to. A few days before the live show, there will be a 48-hour pre-sale on tickets for $5. If you happen to miss the sale, general admission will be $10. For the after party, the ticket price is $5. So come hang out and listen to the case that my awesome guest and I will be telling you all about. If you can't make it to the live show, you can purchase a ticket and watch the replay. It will be available for 1 week after the live recording. Now, on to today's episode.
I wish I'd never done it. It was all a mistake. I've taken back 1,000 times.
Well, I think that's the one baffling part of this case, that to this day we can't understand why he committed this mass murder.
Here is what we know about the Privacky family. Linda Ann Watts Privacky was born on February 1st, 1950 in Fukuoka, Japan to Jack Dennis Watts. Stephen Charles Privacky was born on June 3rd, 1948 to John Privacky in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Stephen and Linda Privacky married and had 2 children in Muskegon, Michigan. Jedidiah, who went by Jed, was born on December 19, 1978. Then, on July 2, 1980, they had a little boy they named Seth. Stephen Privacky was a science teacher at Reeth's Puffer Intermediate School. Along with teaching science for 25 years, Stephen could be depended on by any faculty member to volunteer at committees, and he was on the district's technology committee. Stephen also assisted in opening the brand new school building. He was highly thought of at the Reeth's Puffer School. His wife Linda was a loved receptionist at a medical office. In the early 1990s, Jed and Seth were working at the Dalton grocery store together. The owner, Sue Scott, said the 2 boys were complete opposites. Jed was a hard worker, whereas Seth would sneak to the back to read comic books. Sue said their father Stephen would show up and he would scold Seth for not living up to what he wanted Seth to be. The family seemed really nice, but even Sue could tell there was something underlying that smelled of trouble. She said that it seemed like Jed was deemed the good son and Seth was regarded as the bad son of the family. Seth Privacky was caught red-handed stealing beer and selling it to underage kids. He was fired due to that in November of 1995. He was also on juvenile probation, and after completing that, a few years later, he was still awaiting trial for unrelated misdemeanor charges for robbery. As a part of his sentence for the shoplifting, he had a court-ordered essay to write. In the essay, he expressed his interest in science, how he wanted to get married someday, and travel. In part writing, quote, "I would also like to have kids one day. Not too many, because I know how much trouble I get into and how much of a nuisance I can be sometimes. In a second court-ordered essay, he said, quote, "My goal is to try to become a positive role model in our society, to try and convince my peers to obey the law." November 28th, 1998, April Boss, Jed's girlfriend of 2 years, was over at the Privacky home. April lived with her mother Julie and stepfather Tom. She was attending her first year at Muskegon Community College, studying to become an elementary school teacher, while she was working at Grand Haven Plastics as well. April was a very religious young lady who was in love with life. Her family said she and Jed were practically pre-engaged. They were so in love, and everyone felt they would someday get married. Her parents loved Jed and described the Privackys as an all-American family. Julie and Tom went to the Privackys' home in rural Dalton Township, north of Muskegon, to see if their daughter April was still there. It was almost midnight, and April was supposed to be at work, but never showed up. When her parents pulled up to the house, they saw a man who was bending over another man's body in the driveway. He took off and went inside the home, likely running out of a back door and off into the drizzly night. April's mother and stepfather bravely ran inside of the house, grabbed a portable phone, and ran back outside, calling the police at 11:58 p.m. Julie told the 911 dispatcher that she and her husband were at the Privackys to pick up their daughter, that there was a dead man covered in blood in the driveway, and someone ran into the garage. The dispatcher asked why she thought the man was dead. Julie said, quote, "Because he is totally bloody. He is cold. He's not moving. He's not breathing." She told the dispatcher that there was a tall man in a plaid shirt and light-colored pants leaning over the man's body when they pulled into the driveway, not knowing the man was deceased at the time. Julie said she did not recognize the deceased man or the person she saw hovering over him. When the man ran away, he dropped a flashlight, which was still on, and there was a trail of blood throughout the house and garage. She told the dispatcher, "I am really worried because my daughter's car is here." Julie began sobbing as her husband walked into the house. He turned on the lights and saw nothing but blood. The dispatcher reassured Julie that she was doing great and that she was being very helpful. Deputies and Michigan State Police troopers came to the Privacky home. After they saw the man's body in the driveway, they instantly had the house surrounded, thinking the suspect could be inside. When they went into the household, they found 2 victims in a little back room off the garage, another in a lower room off the basement, and a 4th victim in a bathroom upstairs. 49-year-old Linda, 50-year-old Stephen, 78-year-old John, 19-year-old Jed, and 19-year-old April had all been killed. No weapon was found at the crime scene, but they were riddled with bullet holes. Sheriff's Detective Dennis Edwards said they did have some information on where the weapon could be, and told the Herald Palladium newspaper that they were searching for 18-year-old Seth Privacky. Seth was a potential suspect. Tracking canines were given an item of Seth's to smell, and the dogs led the police to the woods near the home. Tony Tague, a Muskegon County prosecutor, described the scene as being one of the most serious and vicious attacks he had seen in the 15 years he had been working in the profession. There were bodies scattered around the house and blood everywhere. Tony said the family had been shot execution style, and this seemed to have been carried out rather quickly. The autopsies were scheduled for that morning. The father, Stephen, was identified as the man in the driveway. Linda, the mother, was in the upstairs bathroom. Jed was in the basement. Stephen's dad, the grandfather to the children, John, along with Jed's girlfriend April, were in the off room of the garage. Police suspected the scene had been orchestrated, and some of the victims' bodies may have been dragged to the places they were found. On November 29, 1998, in the early afternoon, Jana Simonelli saw someone hitchhiking in the pouring down rain. When she looked a little closer, she realized it was a guy from school that she had known since she was 5 years old, Seth Privacky. She stopped her car. In the back of her mind, she kept replaying the morning news, where it was reported that he was the prime suspect in the deadly shooting of his family members and Jed's girlfriend, April. However, she also saw that there was a Stephen Wallace, also 18, who was arrested that morning as he was sprinting away from the Privacky's home into the woods. Maybe it wasn't Seth who did it. Jana figured she couldn't drive off, and Seth got into her car. She asked Seth where he needed a ride to, and he told her to go to a house located on Duck Lake Road. Seth was acting normal, as if nothing happened, so Jana kept quiet and did the same. On the inside, she was petrified. After Jana got to the location and Seth got out of the car, she fled to the nearest house, asking if she could use their phone to call the police. She called 911, and 15 minutes later, she observed the police zooming by. Seth was inside of a pole barn where he and his buddies, who were in a rock band they called Dementia, would practice their songs. He was drenched and shaking as he was arrested. Jana was still processing the fact that she just had a guy in her car only an hour ago at that point who was wanted for killing 4 of his family members and his brother's girlfriend. Stephen Wallace had been picked up before Seth. He emerged from the woods when a policeman pulled up, and after he was put in the back of the police car, he said, quote, "Seth has done something awful." Stephen Wallace and Seth Privacky were suspected to have committed these killings together, and the prosecutor said that they were both going to be charged with murder. He said it was so difficult to imagine what possesses 18-year-olds to do something like that. Stephen Wallace had been cooperating with the police and the ongoing investigation. Unsure of what the motive could have really been, police had a hunch that family problems may have been a factor. At the time, authorities had not found a gun, but in a lake around 10 miles away from the family home, a pistol ammunition clip was discovered. James Fox, the dean of Northeastern University's School of Criminal Justice at the time, said the holidays are not an abnormal time for tragedies. Speaking about killers in general, he said, quote, "The killer in these situations can be sick and tired of being dominated and ruled. They don't snap. They've simply had enough of being domineered and dismissed. Holidays are a time of family happiness. The killer may have been missing that and resentful of it. At a holiday gathering, a killer who feels this way can get even with the whole family at once. Family vengeance killers often remain near the scene rather than fleeing when they have ample time and opportunity. What counts to them is getting even, not getting away. One neighbor of the Privackys, Wayne Parker, said that both Seth and Jed were nice and quiet, not troublemakers that he knew of. The neighbors never suspected that Seth could be capable of committing such a heinous act that took place right next door. Deputies knocked on their door and told Wayne and his wife to keep their lights off. November 29th was a Monday morning. School counselors were called to Reeth's Puffer High School to help students cope with the murders. The principal, Dan Beckerman, described Seth as a quiet, average student who was not involved in many activities at school. As mentioned in the beginning, their father, Stephen, was a science teacher at Reeth's Puffer Intermediate School. The faculty was in complete shock to hear that he had been killed. As for Seth, a faculty member described him as a nice kid who helped his dad in the classroom and tutored some of his students. It seemed like anyone you asked could not make heads or tails of this. Seth Privacky and Stephen Wallace finally confessed to the police. Seth confessed an hour before the court hearing, telling the authorities the reason for doing it was that his father, Stephen, had threatened to kick him out of the house. He said that he and his father had not been getting along at all lately, and he was upset that his mother and his brother seemed to be taking his dad's side, and he felt they were all against him. This is the transcript of Seth's confession. Detective Edwards. Okay, if you can start from just prior to the incident. What led up to the incident? If I have any questions, I'll stop you. Seth. Okay, me and my dad never really got along the last 5 or 6 years, and we'd always argue, just stupid stuff, and my mom would take his side no matter what. She'd always take his side. It's just been getting worse the past 6 months. When he talked to me, he just yelled at me, never had anything positive to say to me. I used to be real close to my brother. We used to get along so well. In the past 6 months to a year, he was beginning to take sides with my parents more. He used to tell me how bad I was doing in school, that I wasn't going to go anywhere in life, and then, on Sunday, my parents told me that they didn't love me anymore. Detective Edwards. Which one told you that they didn't love you anymore? Seth. My father told me that he didn't love me anymore, and that he wanted me to move out. He didn't want me to live there anymore. My mom and brother didn't say anything. Detective Edwards. What happened then? Seth. Out of anger and rage, I went upstairs in my dad's closet and got his .22 caliber pistol and loaded the clip and went downstairs. My dad had left. We was supposed to eat dinner at 1:30. This was about 1:15. I came up behind my brother. He was sitting in the living room, and I shot him once in the back of the head. I dragged his body downstairs so no one would see it. And then my dad got home with my grandpa. I didn't know my grandpa was supposed to be here, but when they got in the door, I shot them both in the back of the head. Detective Edwards. Where were you at the time when they came in the door? Seth: I was in the living room and I heard the car pull up, so I knew they were coming in and... Detective Edwards: Okay, did you hide somewhere when they came in the door? Seth: No, I acted like I was just walking out the door and I had the gun behind my back. They were facing the opposite direction and I shot them in the back of the head. And then I shot my grandpa again because he wasn't dead yet. Detective Edwards: I need you to speak up a little. Your voice is dropping a little bit. What happened after that? Seth: My mom was in the shower while this was taking place, and then she had just gotten out of the shower, and I went upstairs, and I went into the bathroom, and shot her in the back of the head. And then, when I was coming back downstairs, April came through the front door before I could stop her, and she saw my grandpa and dad. She thought it was just a joke. She walked into the kitchen, and I shot her in the back of the head. I didn't know she was going to come to dinner. Detective Edwards: What happened after that? Seth: Then I called Steve Wallace because I didn't know what to do. Detective Edwards: What did you tell Steve? Seth: I told him I killed my family, and he was just in shock. I asked him to come over and he did. He came over like half an hour later. I begged him to help me clean up. Detective Edwards: Did he help you clean up? Seth: At first he didn't want to, but I begged him and used our friendship against him. Detective Edwards: Okay, and what did you do at the time? Seth: I asked him to get rid of the gun for me because he was leaving. After we cleaned up the bodies downstairs, we wrapped them up in sheets. He took as little involvement as he could. I did most of the work, he just... Detective Edwards: Why did you wrap the bodies in sheets? Seth: Because I was gonna bury them. Detective Edwards: Where were you going to bury them at? Seth: I hadn't decided. Detective Edwards: What happened after that? Seth: We wrapped the bodies up. We wrapped my grandpa, my dad, April, in sheets, and we dragged them outside in the workshop off the garage and left them there. Steve had to go get back. He didn't tell his parents where he was going, and he took the gun with him. I don't know where he threw it. He didn't tell me. I didn't want to know. Detective Edwards: And then? Seth: And then I cleaned up all the blood downstairs. Detective Edwards: How'd you clean up the blood downstairs? Seth: With towels and rags. Detective Edwards: What did you do with the rags and stuff? Seth: Threw them in the garbage bags and put them all in the workshop. Detective Edwards: Okay, and then what happened? Seth: And then I cleaned up the downstairs to make it look like nothing happened at first glance. Detective Edwards: Okay, and where was Steve while you were cleaning up downstairs? Seth: He went back to his house, and he went to a church group, it's a youth group meeting or something like that night. I asked him if he would come back after that and help me, and he said he would. He came back later that night, and I left to go over to my friend's house because I couldn't be there. I picked him up at his girlfriend's house later that night after he got dropped off by his friends, and we went back to my house. We cleaned up all the stuff. We couldn't get the bodies out. Detective Edwards: Why not? Seth: too heavy. We couldn't lift them. So we just decided to leave them where they lay and make it look like a robbery. Detective Edwards. Okay, what did you do to make it look like a robbery? Seth. We took all the sheets off them and put them in plastic bags, thinking I'd burn those, put them in the trunk of the car, and we were going to take the TV and VCR and stereo and make it look like somebody just robbed the place. Detective Edwards. What happened then? Seth. Then we bagged it up in the trunk, and we noticed a car pull up. So I quickly ran out and shut the trunk and ran back inside, and we went out the slider door. We were looking out through the back garage door just to see who it was, and I thought it was a cop, so we both ran. We ran across to the empty lot next door, and we waited for a couple of minutes, and then I decided to go back and check to make sure if it was a cop. And when I went back, it was. And I was making my way back. I was walking down the road to where Steve was at, and there was a car coming down the road, so I jumped in a ditch just to make sure it wasn't another cop. But it was, and I saw his sirens go off about 15 to 20 yards before the spot where Steve was hiding, so I thought they saw him, and I just ran back into the woods. I didn't know what to do. I ran back to the spot to where he was, and I didn't see him. So I went a little further ways back in the woods, and I was looking for him, and I couldn't find him. Then I just went back a little further and waited to see what was going to happen. I could see cop cars going up and down the road, and then I made my way across the creek. I was going to circle around the house to see what was going on from the other neighbor's yard. Then I heard dogs, and I knew they were search dogs, and they were going to start searching for us, so I ran. I ran straight to Whitehall Road, and across Duck Lake Road, and down Duck Lake, and then I turned on Gibson, and then I could hear dogs following, so I kept running and ran across the golf course, and I circled back around, came back up on Duck Lake again. From there, I just made my way west, crossing over roads, crisscrossing my direction. I could always hear dogs and see lights, and I would always avoid them and keep making my way west. I got to Weber Road, and I couldn't hear any more dogs, and I couldn't see any police cars, so I thought I lost them. I kept going north a couple of blocks, and around where Weber meets Riley Thompson, I just laid down and tried to sleep under a pine tree. I woke up the next morning, and I stayed there for a few hours. I thought that they were not pursuing me anymore, so I was going to make my way back to Jason Fitz's house, where I planned to commit suicide. No one was home, so I went in the back pole barn and waited for them to come home, and the police found me and arrested me. Detective Edwards. So, is there anything further that you would like to say? How do you feel about what you did? Seth. I feel awful. I wish I'd never done it. It was all a mistake. I'd take it back 1,000 times. When I ran, it wasn't to get away. In a way, it was to get away so I could kill myself, because I couldn't live with myself for doing this to my family. Detective Edwards. Did you buy any ammunition? Seth. No. Detective Edwards. Did you steal some ammunition? Seth. No. Detective Edwards. Why did you go to Myers to get ammunition? Seth. 'Cause I planned on going small game hunting on Sunday. I never thought about killing my parents until that morning. Detective Edwards. Okay, this statement is concluded at approximately 1:51 p.m. The prosecutor, Tony Tague, stated, quote, "From what we can learn, it was typical teenage differences. Seth thought his father was picking on him and that the others were taking his side." He also added that neither drugs nor alcohol seemed to play any role in the horrific crime. Stephen Wallace did confess that he helped Seth move everyone's bodies around the home to make it appear to be a robbery. Seth Privacky, who had no history of being violent in his day-to-day life or in his criminal record, admitted to a detective that he killed his family around 1:30 in the afternoon that Sunday, the 28th. On December 1st, Seth was arraigned on 5 counts of open murder. 18-year-old Stephen Wallace was charged with the same. Their bail was $5 million each, and the prosecutor, Tony Tague, said they were extremely dangerous. In the courtroom at the arraignment, neither Seth nor Stephen showed any emotion whatsoever, as friends and family members of the victims and suspects cried. Tony did not want to hear the assumptions that depression may have played even a small role in what Seth did. People found out about his depression because documents from 1997 were unsealed that showed he was to go to counseling and take an antidepressant called Wellbutrin after his arrest for stealing and embezzling. Prosecutor Tague stated, quote, "I don't believe with or without the medication his psychological condition is serious enough to alter the charges. There is no significant history of mental illness." He also said he did not know whether Seth was taking his medication or not during the days leading up to the murders. Stephen Wallace's attorney told the judge that his client should only be charged as an accessory, but Tony Tague said there would be more investigative work done before there could be a determination about the charges against either of them being lowered. The Saturday before the tragedy, Seth and Stephen had a conversation where Seth told him he was going to kill his father. So, the next day after the killings, Seth called Stephen and simply said, "It's done. I did it." The two had originally planned to bury the bodies, but Stephen Privacky's body was so heavy they only made it to the driveway with him. Seth and Stephen tried to clean up, move the rest of the bodies around, and stage the crime scene to look like a robbery. Investigators believe that after this, Stephen Wallace drove to the pond 10 minutes away where they found the clip and eventually the gun. Stephen drove to Blockbuster, returned a movie, went home, and then went to a church youth group meeting. While Stephen is doing all of that, Seth was trashing the shell casings in a garbage can at a gas station. Afterwards, he went to a grocery store and got a roll of duct tape and a few plastic bags to make the robbery scene look more realistic. Eventually, Seth and Stephen met back up to clean the house when suddenly April's parents drove up looking for their daughter. Other things police found when they arrived were Seth and Stephen's bloody clothes and a television in one of the Privacky's cars. One of the detectives said Seth blamed Jed, saying it was a murder-suicide pact they made that went wrong. After court on December 1st, one of April's friends, Tina, said outside of the courtroom, quote, "I know parents die, grandparents and aunts and uncles, but never anyone your age." April Boss's stepfather, Tom, wanted answers. Quote, "I just want to know why. I can't believe April did anything to him." Seth and Stephen knew they both could be punished by spending life in prison. The preliminary hearings would be on December 15th. Photo stills from a grocery store security camera were released by the prosecutor on December 2nd, and it showed Seth trying twice that day to purchase .22 caliber bullets. One time being at 9:40 p.m. the night before the massacre. The cashier would not allow him to buy them because he wasn't 21. Prosecutor Tague said, quote, "This shows clear premeditation on the part of Seth Privacky to commit the homicides." Even though the cashier would not sell the bullets to him, a new box of ammunition for the gun were found at the Privacky residence, indicating to investigators that Seth may have stolen them. The next day, residents of the community went to a memorial service in the evening at Reeth's Puffer High School. There was another memorial for only the families and friends of the victims to attend on December 5th, a day after April's funeral. Her stepfather Tom said, quote, "She had a happy life, she loved, and she knew she was loved." On December 6th or 7th, the home of the Privackys was broken into. A relative went to the home around 7 in the morning on Monday, the 7th. This relative had been there cleaning the home until almost 7 p.m. the previous evening. When she arrived the next morning, someone had cut the screen of a back window, trying to make their way inside, but failed. The intruder or intruders finally got in through a front window. It seems whoever did this only went into Seth and Jed's room. The person or persons stole a jacket, 2 speakers used for electric guitars, a pager, and a ring, all from Seth's room. Luckily, the State Police Crime Lab had finished searching the house with a fine-tooth comb, and it was not under protection when the break-in occurred. It was reported on December 15th. Tony Tague, the prosecutor, agreed with the defense attorneys to put off the preliminary examinations of Seth and Stephen. That would buy investigators more time to finish their reports and give them over to the defense. Tony Tague and the defense attorneys said there was a large quantity of police investigative materials that had not been collected just yet. Seth's defense attorney, Fred Lesica, said, quote, "The lawyers agree that we need more time, so we're better prepared for the hearing." Fred Lesica requested a psychiatric exam for Seth. He said he could not rule out an insanity defense. He wanted to do this after the preliminary hearing. Stephen's attorney, Terry Nolan, said Stephen would probably go to a psychiatrist or psychologist for assistance to process and deal with the trauma he was experiencing. They were not seeking the insanity defense. Terry Nolan just wanted Stephen to get some help to cope because he was still in shock. He said, quote, "I'm not ruling out the possibility of him talking to a psychiatrist to explain why a normal kid would not go to authorities, but not in terms of insanity." Terry Nolan claimed that Stephen Wallace was your normal, typical teenager who was put in an unbelievable set of circumstances. Quote, "When the truth comes out, everyone will know Stephen had nothing to do with the murders of these people." As we sometimes see, there are people who unfortunately put killers on a pedestal and even imitate them. One 18-year-old, Vincent Kurtz Jr., said he admired Seth Privacky. He and a 14-year-old broke into the home of Vincent's father on December 2nd, stealing a firearm and bullets from his father's bedroom. Then he fled the home with 2 Halloween masks. On December 17th, he was arrested on gun theft charges, first-degree home invasion, larceny of a firearm, and a felony firearm charge. A detective said, quote, "We were lucky to get him off the street before he hurt someone seriously." Vincent said he idolized Seth Privacky, wanted to share a cell with him, and hoped to get his autograph. He went on to talk about where Seth went wrong, and had he been there, he would not have gotten caught. Tony Tague said Vincent's statements were extremely disturbing. Quote, "Certainly with a case like Seth Privacky looming in the recent past, we wanted to make sure that this young man was locked up before he could cause harm to anyone." On December 29th, 1998, Seth's preliminary hearing began. The judge ruled that he would also be facing 5 charges of felony firearm possession along with 5 counts of open murder. Prosecutor Tague only called one witness to the stand, which was Detective Sergeant Dennis Edwards, who testified that Seth called him to come to the jail so he could confess. The defense attorney, Fred Lesica, wasn't sure that actually happened. He was concerned that Seth's right to not incriminate himself might have been violated. Quote, "There are some issues in the confession that bother me." When Seth was apprehended, he stated he did not want to talk to investigators without a lawyer present. His attorney said there were obvious questions about the voluntary nature of Seth's confession because of that. The confession was given and recorded on tape 1 day prior to an attorney being appointed to him. The goal for Seth's defense attorney was to get his confession thrown out. Fred also brought up the fact that Seth had quit taking his antidepressant medication for possibly over a week leading up to the murders, which might have played a role in the tragedy. A forensic examination was scheduled for Seth to figure out if he could be held criminally responsible. The murder charges against Stephen Wallace were dropped by the prosecutor. He was subsequently charged with being an accessory after the fact, which was a maximum of 5 years, and using a firearm in a felony, which was a maximum of 2 years. Stephen Wallace was to serve both terms simultaneously. Seth, leaning over to the judge, whispered, quote, "Do you think I'll be allowed out of prison someday?" Stephen's bond was reduced to $50,000. After paying 10% of it, he was released. His attorney, Terry Nolan, said, quote, "He's a senior in high school and good standing. I hope to get him back into school. Seth victimized Stephen as well, and he deserves to get his life back on track. He was a victim like the others. He got thrown into this situation." Stephen told the jurors, quote, "I wasn't using the best judgment that day after I saw what I saw. I figured he'd be caught one way or another, and I tried to pretend I didn't know about it. I wish now I would have contacted authorities. He just simply said his problems would be solved if his parents were dead, and he would kill them. I thought it was nothing outside of the typical relationship of teenage kids with their parents." Speaking about when Seth called him around 2:30 p.m. on the day of the massacre, quote, "He told me he'd, quote, made a big mistake. He didn't specifically say what the mistake was. I asked about it and he simply said, 'Come over.'" When Stephen got to Seth's, he said, quote, "He was standing in the front yard smoking a cigarette and crying. This was typical. Frequently when he got into fights with his father, he'd end up crying." Seth then asked Stephen to go to the store and pick up some garbage bags. Stephen claimed when he got back to the Privacky's house, he decided to go inside, even though Seth said he might not want to do that. Stephen said when he walked into the dining room, he stumbled over a body. He took off to the basement, seeing Jedidiah's body. Then he moseyed upstairs where he found Miss Linda Privacky. Quote, "I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen something like that. I had to see it for myself." Stephen said he was walking down the stairs when he suddenly fainted. Seth helped him regain consciousness. Prosecutor Tague said while Stephen did cooperate with authorities, he understood that he was helping a friend cover up a gruesome crime, and he should be held accountable for his actions. Quote, "I think both men are depraved individuals who clearly were acting without any normal conscience. Both of them deserve significant time in prison." Seth was put in jail awaiting his upcoming trial on January 11, 1999. On January 3, 1999, Deborah Wallace, Stephen's mother, said, quote, "He was in such a state of shock he didn't know what he was doing. He blanked out part of the day." His parents said he was traumatized and often disoriented emotionally. Stephen's father, also named Stephen, along with Deborah, feared what would have happened to their son if he had not helped Seth. Police argue that Stephen had ample opportunity to call 911 after leaving the Privacky's residence the first time, but instead, by his own admissions, he smoked marijuana, destroyed a few mailboxes, then returned to the Privackys to help Seth clean up the scene of the crime. Stephen's father stated, quote, "My son reacted out of fear, shock, and denial." Deborah said that yes, her son made a critical, life-altering mistake, but that he was no delinquent, adding that when he saw the police, Stephen ran to them and didn't run away. Police responded to that, saying that Stephen crept out of his hiding spot because he thought they saw him. When he walked up to them, he made up a story about going to Seth's house to pick up a few bats so he could vandalize mailboxes. Seth said in his confession that Stephen did not want to help him in the beginning when he called, but he pleaded with him, using their friendship against him. Seth also said that Stephen didn't do much at all when he was supposed to be helping and tried to do the least possible because he didn't want to be mixed up in something he knew was extremely bad. However, Seth did say Stephen assisted him in wrapping the bodies in sheets and got rid of the gun and clip. Deborah said, quote, "Had my son gone there and refused to cooperate with him, perhaps he would have been killed as well." At the end of January 1999, the judge moved Seth's trial date up to July 7th. His defense lawyer asked to waive the state's speedy trial rule. The prosecutor's office thought about delaying the trial until September. Assistant prosecutor Brett Gardner told the Muskegon Chronicle, quote, "We have dozens of witnesses, and with the July trial, we'd expect at least a few to be on vacation." Seth's defense attorney wanted more time to prepare motions to likely challenge Seth's confession to be allowed in court, and for Seth to have a psychiatric evaluation. Stephen Wallace's trial was scheduled for April 20th. It was also reported that Seth would never get his hands on any money from his parents' estates or life insurance. The judge blocked Seth from being able to inherit any estates of his mother Linda and father Stephen, and Seth was blocked from getting more than $100,000 of their life insurance. Instead, that money would go into a court-supervised interest-bearing escrow trust. In early May, Seth insisted on throwing out his defense and making a plea. He pleaded no contest, which is not admitting guilt. He pleaded no contest to protect himself in any civil lawsuits. Tony Tague said Seth was planning to plead guilty to all the charges, to which he said, quote, "The sooner the better. Seth Privacky realizes we have an open and shut case against him, and there's no point in going to trial." April's father, Gary, said Seth's decision to plead guilty was a good thing that would spare them having to sit through court and listen to the details, causing them to suffer more. The Lansing State Journal reported that Stephen Wallace's trial got bumped up to October, but he would be in court on May 17th. His defense attorney filed a motion to drop the firearms charges, which would be the 2-year prison sentence. However, Tony Tague said Stephen's fingerprints were all over the duct tape that had bound bloody clothes together, which he and Seth used to move the bodies. Then, the clothes were put in the trunk of the car. Tony was very happy that Seth's plea was accepted because he wanted to spend all his time concentrating on Stephen Wallace. On May 27, 1999, Seth Privacky was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Seth said he was sorry for what he did, and he was there to accept the punishment that he said he most certainly deserved. Other members of his family chose not to say anything during the court hearing or when it was over. Muskegon County Circuit Court Judge James Graves said during Seth's sentencing, quote, "You turned what should have been a pleasant Thanksgiving weekend into your own private killing fields. The punishment provided by law in this case almost seems inadequate." April's sister Virginia wrote a letter to the court that was read aloud by an assistant prosecutor. A part of her letter read, quote, "If we let this young man go, what happens the next time he gets angry? Is he going to get his hand on an easy gun and kill more people?" Also read aloud was a letter from April's stepmother Kim, who wrote, Seth had robbed their family of a loving, caring person. Quote, "There are no words to describe the grief, loneliness, the total sense of loss we feel." The Battle Creek Enquirer reported on October 2, 1999, Stephen Wallace was charged with 4 extra felony counts of being an accomplice. These extra counts would not increase his potential penalties. Stephen was still out on bond, waiting for his trial to begin on October 19th. His sentence of 7 years would not change, no matter how many counts were tacked on. Tony Tague said, quote, "It's been my intent from the onset to ensure Stephen Wallace pay the highest possible penalty under the law for his involvement in this mass murder. This is strictly a legal move to allow the jury to convict Stephen Wallace for his involvement in the cover-up of each individual's death, as opposed to one count for his actions involving all the victims." On November 1st, after listening to almost 2 weeks of testimony and arguments from both sides, a jury spent almost 5 hours deliberating before finding Stephen Wallace not guilty on 5 counts of being an accessory after the fact and innocent of using a firearm by disposing of the murder weapon. Stephen's defense attorney, Terry Nolan, said, quote, "I think Stephen's testimony was what decided it for the jury. I think the jury was impressed with his honesty and believed him." After being found innocent, Stephen cried. His defense attorney and family were happy about the outcome and were adamant that Stephen just acted out of fear, anxiety, and shock. In 2007, Seth became a Christian, which he said changed his viewpoints and attitude. He wrote a testimonial letter stating that when he was taken to jail after the murders, he found himself, quote, coming off a strong dose of LSD, threw up, and wanted to kill myself. Seth had never mentioned using drugs ever, not even in his confessions, so law enforcement officers were not too convinced about his statement. Seth said he seemed unapproachable and distant because of how he was raised. In his testimonial, he said, quote, my parents raised me with an atheistic or agnostic view to life. I never had a lot of friends and was antisocial as early as grade school. I was considered a troublemaker and often found myself in the principal's office. Detective Edwards said everyone who goes to prison finds God or becomes extremely religious. Seth wrote that he started dabbling in substances like alcohol and marijuana around the age of 14. Then, by the time he was 16, he said he started trying out LSD and speed. Quote, I started selling drugs to support myself and my habit. I played bass in a rock band and was promiscuous throughout high school. Writing about Christian volunteers coming to visit him, he said, after a few months, my heart had started to turn to Christ. Seth was baptized in the cell block shower. Of prison, he wrote, quote, prison is viewed by the convicts as a predator-prey environment where the strong take advantage of the weak. I've been involved in fights and assault. I have extorted other convicts for money, and I was involved in the drug trade. At one point, Seth was using a tattoo gun, and when he got caught, he had to spend a week in segregation. After his time in segregation was done, he was taken back to a cell that holds 2 inmates. 48 hours had not even passed when an officer discovered a razor blade mixed in with his possessions. Back to segregation he went, this time for 4 months. At this time, Seth had 29 misconducts on his record. Some of his misconducts consist of theft, fighting, assaulting another prisoner, possession of a weapon, using marijuana, and gambling. Honestly though, Seth had it pretty good at the Kinross Correctional Facility, located in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He did things such as raking leaves, cutting grass, shoveling, and different general maintenance. Not only being active and doing things considered as work, but Seth was able to watch TV in the housing unit day room, or if he decided to buy a TV, he could have one in his cell. There were many educational and vocational classes Seth could take, and there was a prison library with so many books to choose from. Seth also had access to a gym and various other outdoor leisure activities. In November 2008, he had 36 people come to visit him over the course of the year. It seems as if he did not have to stay in his cell all of the time, and he had many opportunities to get out of his cell and actually have activities to do. Back in 2007, he had been riding back and forth with a woman from Chino, California, who would sell letters on a website called Supernaut. That is or was a website where people sell different items that were from murderers, including the most infamous killers. Seth did a drawing of a butterfly next to his name in one of his letters, saying it was similar to the tattoo he had. It's unsure how the two met each other, and the woman could not be reached for comment. In their exchanges, he talked about how he was amazed by Bob Ross, a painter who hosted a painting show on PBS called The Joy of Painting. So he asked the woman if she knew who Bob Ross was, and said, quote, "He drives me crazy. He'll do a complete 18 by 24 oil landscape that looks badass in like 20 minutes, and here I am spending 40 or 50 hours on a piece." At one point, he asked the woman where she lived and if she had any roommates, telling her he had cellmates to deal with and, quote, "They can really suck sometimes." The two sent pictures of each other back and forth, and he told her, "Damn, girl, you're gorgeous, but you're not telling me much about yourself. I want to know about you." Seth liked to listen to bands like Godsmack, older 9 Inch Nails songs, and Evanescence. He was described as very smart, and he loved to read. He told a woman in a letter that he had enjoyed reading books by Anne Rice since he was in high school. He also told her that he liked older Stephen King books, but not the newer books, saying, quote, "His new stuff is mostly garbage." He gave her author recommendations like Mark Twain and John Steinbeck. Seth even told her that he played sports often, lifted weights, and jogged. He said doing anything physically demanding made him happy. Seth rarely ever talked about the victims, his own family, or what he did to them. In his testimonial, he also wrote that trying to accept the fact that he was going to die in prison was not easy, but, quote, "Through reading God's Word, I found a glimmer of peace and comfort." Fast forward a few years, July 15th, 2010, at Kinross Correctional Facility. Seth was 30 years old when he and 2 other inmates, 31-year-old Brian Davidson and 25-year-old Andrew Ross, decided to attack and subdue the driver of a tractor trailer. It was stopped at a loading dock to deliver food around 9:10 a.m. After the inmates overtook the driver and took the keys, the tractor trailer smashed into a double chain-link fence that was topped with razor wire, becoming completely entangled by the fence. The truck rolled about 100 yards, then Seth and the other 2 inmates jumped out and started making a run for it. The guards warned them to stop running. A corrections officer shot Seth Privacky, and he died. Andrew and Brian surrendered. The driver of the tractor trailer was okay, besides a few minor injuries. Thankfully, nothing life-threatening. The prison of more than 1,800 prisoners was put on lockdown. No other inmates were missing. Brian Davidson was serving life in prison for committing a homicide in 2002 in Kent County. Andrew Ross was serving 40 years for killing 3 people in 2003 in Macomb County. Now they were going to be charged with attempting to escape. Seth had been shot in the head by that corrections officer.
Ironically, he died in the same fashion that all 5 of his victims did.
Shot in the head.
You think of irony, karma, what you sow, so shall you reap.
Certainly, I was just relieved because I view him as an extremely dangerous man that the Department of Corrections took the necessary steps to ensure that he didn't escape.
Justice, Tag says, has been served.
I guess this is the last chapter in this horrific crime in Muskegon.
One of Stephen Wallace's biggest regrets is not asking Seth why he killed his whole family. What happened to a seemingly normal teenage kid to cause him to snap so intensely that he senselessly murdered 5 people? The sheriff believed there had to be mental health issues and substance abuse at play. Seth's reason as to why he committed this awful massacre will forever be a mystery. 5 great people lost their lives, and it's hard to believe he went to such premeditated measures to kill everyone in his family and April Boss because he and his father got into a spat. There was a plethora of alternatives to choose from to actually try and make things better with his family, but he chose the extreme act of annihilation. If Seth had ever even decided to tell his explanation of why he did it, at the end of the day, 5 people lost their lives, and there's no excuse he could ever have said that made these killings justified. Maybe the reason would have helped professionals learn more about his teenage mind and what some other teenagers may even be thinking or going through. However, for us to know that reason won't bring those 5 people back. 5 people who had good lives. They were happy and simply wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving together as a family who were grateful for each other. That concludes this episode of the Thanksgiving weekend Privacky Family Massacre. Thank you, as always, so much for listening. Before I close out, I want to thank all of the jailbirds over on the Patreon at patreon.com/ReverieTrueCrime. Thank you so much for your support, Stephanie, Lexi, Rob, Gigi, Rachel, Justin, Dooley, Steve, TZ, Angel, Lorraine, Badcast Company, Jade, Chelsea, and Matt. Until next time, everyone, please stay safe, take good care of yourselves and each other. Love you guys.